American Iron Off-Road ball joint delete installation video. I'm doing a rebuild kit, so all the steps will be the same except for pressing in and out cups. I don't have to do that because I've already done it several years ago. This is the lower stud. It has the lip on it. It is the longer of the two studs, so this will be your lower. The top nut, the nylon lock nut, is a 1 1/16 socket, and that's going to fit both the lower and the upper nylock nuts. For the lower nut here, you're going to need a 24 for the lower, and the upper is a 7/8. And this is the progression for the spherical bearing. Once you put the bearing in, you're going to use a retaining clip to hold it in place. After you slide this through the spherical bearing, this is the order it's going to go in for the lower, and this is the order it's going to go for the upper, the metal shim. Your lower nuts will be torqued to 40 foot-pounds. Your upper nuts will be torqued to 30 foot-pounds. A couple other things here. While I'm doing this, I'm going to install a new wheel bearing hub assembly. This is for a Dana 44, and the product number is 100213363. Some other things you are going to need is a size 36 to take off your axle shaft nut, a size 21 to take off your caliper bolts, a size 13 to take off your wheel bearing hub assembly, and then I like to have a couple different size extensions for that. The 3/8 socket wrench. You'll need a number 5 hex to take out the wheel speed sensor, and then of course 1/2 inch for most everything. Let's get started. I'm going to start by loosening the axle shaft nut with a size 36 socket. You can also use a 35. I happen to have a 36. And then I'm going to loosen these, pop the wheel off. The next step is going to be taking off the brake caliper with a size 21 socket. Got one bolt here and one bolt here. Okay, I have the lower bolt out, and I've almost got the upper bolt out, but before I take it all the way out, I'm just going to slide the rotor over to allow access to the speed sensor. And I'm going to get that out using the size 5 hex. Now that I've got that wheel speed sensor out, carefully feed it through without getting it dirty. I'm going to tuck it out of the way. Finish taking off the bolts for the caliper. Now you can use a bucket to set this on. I'm just going to hang mine. Now the next step is going to be taking the axle nut off. I've already loosened it, so it should come out easily. But if it is spinning your axle shaft, what you can do is place a bar in here, and that will keep it in place while you loosen it. The next step is going to be taking the wheel bearing hub assembly off. You'll need a size 13 socket, and there are 3 bolts for this. So one up top here, one down here, and the third one is also on the bottom around the back. Or I guess this would be the front of the Jeep. And they're kind of hard to access, especially with RCV axle shafts. So I like to use 2 different size extensions, and you're gonna have to turn your steering wheel left or right to get better access to these bolts. So I turn the steering wheel to the left. That's going to give me really easy access. To these 2. I'll need a longer extension for the upper one. It's going to be a little challenging. I've broken a couple in the past, so it's not a bad idea to order a few spares. And if it's your first time taking it off, you might want to keep the bolts in a little bit. Don't take them all the way out. So you're going to have to beat on the bearing to get it out. So you don't want it just flying off. So if you have the threads in just a little bit, it's going to keep it from falling out. But I replace mine every time that I put new tires on, so it should come off pretty easily. So there's one. I can finish this upper one. Still need it. It's number 2. Tap on this a little, get it to break free. This is the part that I was saying can be really difficult, and it helps to keep the threads of the bolt in just a little bit to keep it from just falling off when you hit it. But mine's coming out pretty easy. So the next step is pulling out the axle shaft, which is not a big deal unless you have RCV axle shafts. Then it's a bit harder. What I found works the best is you have to get that boot off to pull it through your knuckle. So I just take a crowbar and get it up on the boot and gently pry it off. I'm gonna have to do it with two hands because I'm gonna have to pull on the shaft out a little bit while I'm pushing that boot off. Slide the shaft out. Pull it through the boot. There we go. And we just need to grab the boot and get it out of here. Next up, I'm just going to unbolt the bolt joint delete and drop the knuckle. I've got a jack stand here I'm going to place underneath the tie rod to hold the knuckle up, just to keep it out of my way. For the old top, I used a 7/8 and a wrench, adjustable wrench, and then for the bottom it's 1/1/16 and an adjustable wrench. So now for the fun part, I'll try and get those studs out of the old spherical bearings, and I didn't paint these before I put them in, so they're rusted. The driver's side, I had to use a ball joint press to press the stud out from the spherical bearing. I'm hoping I don't have to do that on this side, but I might have to. We'll see. Ball joint press time. That was it. I just got the upper spherical bearing out. I found the easiest way to do it is a deep 18 socket. So I ended up getting the bottom one out just by hitting it with the hammer. Next step is to insert your lower shaft into the knuckle. Slide it in there and I'm going to give it a couple little taps with the hammer just to help seat it a little bit so it doesn't spin as much. And then take your nylock nut, upper stud shaft, right into the taper. Put your nylock nut on the bottom, give it a couple little taps. And then torque it to 40 foot-pounds, same as the lower. That one just doesn't want to do it. So how I'm going to do this is I have an old nylock nut on the top. This is not a new one. And I'm going to use that just to keep this in place while I torque it. Alright, I've reached my torque. Now I'm just going to take this old nylock nut off. Also, if you don't have an old nylock nut, you could just go to Lowe's, Home Depot, some hardware store and buy just two normal nuts, not nylocks, and put one down a bit and put the other one on top of it, tighten them together with 2 wrenches, and you could use that to hold it in place. Torque the bottom and then use your 2 wrenches to loosen the 2 nuts on top and pull them off. Now I'm going to insert these spherical bearings. I had them in the freezer for about 45 minutes or so, just to make this a little easier. Place it on top, presses in pretty good. Take your size 24 socket, just lightly tap it in there. Okay, that feels like it's seated. I'm going to do the bottom from the bottom upward. Once I got both spherical bearings in place, I then inserted the retainer clip in the top of the upper and from the bottom on the lower, so both retaining clips are in. The next step is put an O-ring, O-ring on the top stud. Take the .048 metal shim and place over that O-ring. And take your nylock nut, put it on top. We're going to torque that to 30 foot-pounds. The lower stud is going to be a similar process. We've got your rubber O-ring over the stud. You're going to want to press that in there. Now what's different about the top is the bottom takes this plastic shim and that goes over the rubber. Oh, and then you grab another nylock nut, put it on top. That will also be torqued to 30 foot-pounds. So again, this is a 1 1/16 millimeter socket. Here we go. 30 foot-pounds. So do the same to the bottom. There we go, 30 foot-pounds. Now we just need to take a marker to mark the nut and the stud together. These two pieces will rotate with each other, so you don't need to mark the cup. You just want to mark the stud to the nut. So mark it here, same on the bottom, stud to nut, and stud to nut. Have it. Got the, well, it will not focus. Now that the rebuild is complete, we need to put everything back together. So we're going to start by putting the boot back in place the best that we can. Line that up with the hole, and we're going to feed through the axle shaft. Careful when putting it in so that you don't knock out your inner axle seal. And then just pop it back in the boot. That's it. That's in there. I'm going to clean these threads off a little bit. Make sure there's no big chunks on them. And now it's time to install the new unit bearing. So here's the new unit bearing, and it comes with the new sensor, speed sensor. I don't need it, I just replaced mine not that long ago. Now the opening for the speed sensor is going to face the front of the vehicle. So you're going to line up the 3 threaded holes with the holes in the knuckle, slide it over your axle shaft. The speed sensor hole facing forward. Next we just need to put these 3 bolts back in with a size 13 socket. So I actually pulled the unit bearing out just a little bit, and that allowed me to be able to get all 3 bolts past the boot of my RCV, and now I can start threading it one at a time. Well, alternating, one a little bit, the next a little bit, the next a little bit, until it's fully seated. Now you are going to want to torque those 3 bolts to 75 foot-pounds. Needed to rotate that tire, or turn the steering wheel a little more so that I could get that socket on there better. Now those two, I'm going to turn the wheel and get the last one. The next step, we're going to put the axle shaft nut back on. You can put some Loctite on there if you want. This one is pinched. I'm not too worried about it because I'm oftentimes working on my Jeep and always checking torque specs, and I've never had an issue with it coming loose. So we're going to torque that to 90 foot-pounds, and to keep this all from spinning while I'm torquing it, I'm going to take a crowbar, stick in there, put it on the ground. Now it's not going to rotate on me. Or you could put your tire back on, set it on the ground, and get your torque that way. I prefer doing this right now though. 1 foot-pounds, that's all it needs. Now we need to get that speed sensor put back in. I guess I need to put the brake caliper on first. So let's get this caliper rotor put back on. I'm going to just place the rotor on here. I'm going to get the bolt started, but I don't want to fully set it in because I need to leave space for me to bolt that little speed sensor back in, and that rotor will be blocking that access if it's in place. Now again, you could use Loctite on these. I've actually had one come off, so it's not a bad idea. But that was a while ago. Should always be retorquing things, checking them. So now I'm going to leave access to get in there, and I'm going to use an extension. Find where I just set it. Okay, Found an extension, size 5 hex, the bolt. Grab that speed sensor, feed it through here without getting it all dirty. And I'm just going to carefully put it in that hole. I'm going to start off doing it by hand. This doesn't have to be very tight. I don't remember what the torque spec is. I think it's like 12 foot-pounds or something. It's not much. So got in there. Now I can scoot this all the way over and finish torquing the caliper back on. The caliper gets torqued to 120 foot-pounds. I'll get these hand tight first. Kind of lift up on the caliper and rotor to take tension off of the bolt so I can do it further by hand. Alright, now we got our size 21 set to 120 foot-pounds. The bottom one. Check that top one again. It's all good. So now I need to zip tie the speed sensor wire to the knuckle because I don't have my little clip anymore. So I'm just going to take a zip tie or two and zip tie it right over here so that it doesn't come up where the ball joint delete rotates. I want it to be on the side, out of harm's way. And there we go, zip tied up here, nice and tight, off to the side, right on this rubber part of the cable. See that thick rubber part? There's several of these. That's what I used for the zip tie. And now it's nice and snug, it's not going anywhere, it's not touching anything. Now we just have to put the tire back on, torque it, and we're good to go.